And we are recording. All right. Well, welcome to the first Wednesday of 2023. And we're just finishing up the book. We're going to be starting on page 145. And this is the chapter called New Problems and New Directions. And I'm actually going back a paragraph because we're going to be starting on the following page, both and thinking. But I wanted to read this last paragraph on this page just to kind of give us a segue into what he's talking about, or that first sentence that's referencing this will not make any sense on the next page. New problems and new directions. I know if you can remember a whole year ago now, actually 2 weeks ago, where we left off, he's basically wrapping up the book, and he's talking about the characteristics of someone who has successfully moved into the second half of life. And he was talking about the problems that this is going to create, and obviously the directions. This particular little short subchapter, loneliness and solitude, and kind of talking about the differences between the two and how you move into this place of solitude. And then he's going to now segue into this both and, as opposed to either or thinking. Either or thinking being a characteristic of the first half of life, and both and being the characteristic of the second half. So,
I'm
you have
sorry,
a question, Joanne?
I have to leave. This is messing up my husband's work right now. So I'm going to try and figure this out before I come back next week. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, if you want to get back on your phone, then at least you can listen to what we're all saying.
Yeah, so could my husband. It didn't help. We didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah, you don't have to sit here with your phone.
What?
I said, you don't have to sit here with your phone.
We'll be looking out for you, Joanne, whenever you can rejoin us.
Okay.
Bye.
Prayer.
All right. Don't know what that was all about, but okay. All right, so the bottom of page 145, he's talking about a double kind of belonging, a kind of double belonging. Is characteristic of people at this stage. At what stage? At the stage that they're at the second half of life. No one group meets all of their needs, desires, and visions. I bet that if you've lasted this long with this book, you yourself are a double belonger, maybe even a triple or more. Colonized people, oppressed people, every kind of minority have had to learn several kinds of belonging to survive and get through the day. For us more comfortable folks, it is still a stretch, but finally a stretch that many are making, perhaps without even realizing it. I don't know if we talked about this briefly a little bit last week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, whatever it's been now. Do you all feel that you have multiple groups that you belong to? And it's kind of interesting to kind of take stock of that and to see. We had used Ellen as our poster child for this, because Ellen is going to about 3 different churches right now. And she's got her foot in the effect. She's got her foot in EV Free. Is it still called EV Free, Ellen?
Fullerton Free.
Fullerton Free now.
Yeah, there was a change in philosophy.
Yeah, Fullerton Free. She went to Catholic Mass for Christmas. Yes. And so these are the multiple groups. And what she's finding is exactly what he says. No one group meets all of Ellen's needs, desires, and visions, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the key. She is gleaning from each group and each community certain things, and doesn't feel that by going to any one group, it precludes her from going to another group, or that her loyalty is being divided or anything. She's able to comfortably switch from group to group and be a part of all of them. And she also recognizes some of the groups that she doesn't really agree with everything, but it doesn't really matter that much because she's part of the community now. And so she was our poster child. But as you look at your own life, take stock of that as well. How many groups do you belong to? And if you think about yourself earlier in life, where it really wasn't possible to be a part of multiple groups that maybe believe different things or different flavors of things, and how that really was a conflict. And now at this stage of life, it just doesn't seem important anymore, that there's much more that combines us and unites us rather than dividing us. And this is that quality that he's talking about, that we can be double and triple and even more belongers. And it's a beautiful thing if you think about it. Anyone else have just a comment on that? Seeing that in your own life?
Most staff programs, they call it a double wiener.
A double winner?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that has a little different connotation, John, doesn't it? That means you got problems coming from both sides of the fence, and so you need more than one group to be able to deal with those problems. But I get what you're saying. But yeah, so if you're both part of Al-Anon and AA, yeah, you're definitely a double winner. So that means you are one and you're living with one. Lucky you. Okay.
I want to add to, as children, we also actually experience this because, there's a mixture of cultures, two cultures, there's intermarriage, and then we are in the California. So as children, we learn to navigate the melding of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of course,
Learn to
children
adapt.
haven't had time to develop so much of the biases and
Mhm.
prejudices and all the other things that go into our over-identification with one group or another. And I think that's really the key of what's going on here between the first and second half of life. In the first half of life, we identify externally. We identify with our performance and our achievements and our roles and our attributes, and we also identify with our groups that we belong to in our communities. In the second half of life, we're finding a deeper identity that transcends all of those, which allows us then to be able to move seamlessly from group to group because our identity is no longer attached in those areas. And now we can really be a part of different communities and see the beauty and the truth and the connection in them without getting caught up on where our identity lies in one or the other. And that's
Dave?
really what's going on here. Yeah.
I was just going to bring up, I know you've heard us talk about this, but I have a great niece that lives in Thailand. She's Israeli. She's being raised by her Israeli father, but they live and go to school in Thailand. She goes to one of these beautiful international schools in Bangkok. And I went to visit it years ago with my brother, and the school is filled with international kids from every walk of life you can imagine. There were Ethiopian kids and kids from Switzerland and kids from, India, and all different languages and cultures. And she was learning multiple languages herself, and she's going on 13 now. So, I mean, what I saw was just this invisibility that they didn't really care what color the skin was or what language they were speaking. They're all doing the same activities together. They're all learning together. And we're just kind of watching her grow up. And we really foresee that she's going to be this very global type personality, that she's comfortable traveling anywhere with any type of a culture. And it's just kind of an interesting experiment that we're all kind of watching her do this. And her father takes her everywhere around the world. So they travel with. It's just, and what you said, Ellen, it just made me think of that, because as a child, she's just growing up with it. I don't think she even thinks about it. It's just coming naturally to her and all the other children that are just playing and studying together. So it's just kind of interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how she is in her second half of life and what she chooses to do. We always said she's going to work for the United Nations or something, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But.
I would agree.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave.
No,
I
I was
was
just going to comment on that, but you go first.
Yeah, I was just to say, I agree with the statement that colonized people, oppressed people, every kind of minority has learned to, belong in several different ways, and I agree with that. But for me personally, I kind of I've tried to go beyond that there isn't a distinction, between a minority learning to navigate versus humans learning to navigate. So I don't, where I agree with him, I think it's got to go a little further than that for people of color and minorities. So
Yeah, looking at it along those lines, I've always been amazed at William's ability to just kind of be wherever he is, in this country as opposed to his country of origin, among white people, among Black people. I mean, I just watch William just kind of flow, and I don't know if he feels less comfortable in certain areas or another with certain groups or other, but I've never noticed that in you, William. You always seem to be so comfortable wherever you are.
This conversation actually came up today, and one of the downsides of it, and I think it's a type 9 personality thing, where I've always gotten along with different groups of people, but I remember distinctly feeling like I didn't belong
Mhm.
anywhere. Like in college, I had my fraternity people and my student government people, and my roommate was a Republican, so I was hanging out with his friends, and basically these groups of people didn't have a whole lot of overlap in common. Like if I met them all at the same party, a fight would break out, basically. And I moved seamlessly between groups, but I never felt like I belonged to any one group. And I felt like, and part of this might have been the immigrant experience as well. It's kind of like you never can go back home. When you go back home, you don't quite fit in there, and you don't quite fit in here. So there's a bit of a trade-off of the both and philosophy, especially when you want to feel like, okay, this is my core group. This group is probably the first group I've felt that with, in terms of having a core group in probably all my life.
That's a huge compliment. Thank you.
Yes,
That's
it
great.
is.
Yeah.
Well,
And just to say again, what you just described, William, is also the characteristic of someone who's living in liminal space, right? Because they always are on the threshold. They're never all the way into any one group. And so that group never really trusts them. No group fully trusts the person in liminal space because they haven't drunk the Kool-Aid the way the rest of the group has. And so you're always, and where is your core? Where is your home? And there's all of that, of course. But I think even as we're talking about this code shifting and its ability to be comfortable in various groups or have more than one group on this particular level can still all be done in a first half of life mindset or perspective. Like Kathy's niece, your niece, right, Kathy? Yeah, Kathy's niece, even though she's so seamlessly and kind of a citizen of the world, so to speak, she still can be doing all of that and still identifying in a first half of life way with achievement and accomplishment and roles and all of that. So there's going to be another level to this when she moves into the second half of life. But perhaps because she's so able to just flow, it'll be easier for her to make that transition because she hasn't locked in so much into one place if she doesn't do that. But there is a whole other level to this movement to the second half of life where our identity is now internal and really connected with the unseen spirituality of this all, rather than just what we can see external to ourselves. And so I think there's different levels, but at least the analogy is there for us to kind of see. Okay, Jerry, I cut you off.
That's okay. This helped me understand my granddaughter better. She's biracial, and she's darker, but she goes to a predominantly white, she calls them redneck schools. So right now, she's identifying as a Black person and completely forgetting the white part of her. And she hasn't, so I get it. I get it. She's in the first part of her life, and her identity is associated right now with the color of her skin and her biracial. So I'm excited, and I hope with time, when she gets older, that she will, grow into what he's talking about, being, and then for me, I think back to the program, I can go to any Al-Anon meeting and fit in. it's not my identity. Al-Anon is no longer my identity. There was a time it was my identity, but now I can go to Maryland and go to a meeting, and I'm at a meeting, and because I need a meeting and it's for me. And it might be a little different than the ones I normally go to. Is that the same thing as feeling it doesn't matter what the meeting and who's in the meeting, and but I'm going because I'm going for me in my growth. Is that the same thing?
Yes, I think so.
Oh,
I think
okay.
so. Yeah, your
Yeah, because
ability
I've
to,
noticed a change in how I approach meetings, and that, you know, some meetings I like, some meetings I don't like, but it doesn't matter because I'm going for me now, and to give back, of course, to share, but it doesn't matter what's happening to everybody else in the meeting. Where before, you know, I took full responsibility of the meeting because that's who I am. I'm a control freak. But I can see a change. When I was reading this, I thought, oh, I have seen a change in how I approach this. It's not my identity. Al-Anon is no longer my identity. It's a group, and it's a tool that I use in my recovery. Does that make sense?
that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, and there are differences between meetings, especially East Coast to West Coast.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, different culture,
yeah.
different style, different meetings. So to be able to not get so hung up that this meeting isn't like my meetings, you know, and that's not the
yes.
way you do it. This is the way you do it, you know, and to be able to
And it
just
used to be, it would
flow.
be like, how dare them not read the stats or whatever, you know?
Exactly.
And now, whatever their procedures are, I mean, it's all still pretty structured, but it helped me with my granddaughter. She's really gotten into, you know, her Black culture and just clinging just to that instead of broadening, you know, and looking at the other side of her, you know. So I look forward to when she blends the two together.
Yes. Remembering the original meaning of religion, which is religio, or to rebind or reconnect. You know, so what religion really should be teaching us to do is to bring all the disparate threads of our lives together, and what he's referring to as the grand unified field, right? From Einstein. But that idea that everything really does belong. Everything really does connect. It really is all one thing in the final analysis, but it just doesn't appear that way from day-to-day life. So for us to be able to see underneath the diversity, see the unity of it all, see that our identity is not wrapped up in all that diversity. It's really connected universally to the core that everybody shares. And that changes everything. And so then we can move from group to group and be comfortable and not be so fixated on the differences that we're attached to, but to let go of those attachments and be able to flow. That's all second half of life kind of stuff, you know. Changes us into people who are inclusive, right? Who can truly love the enemy, quote unquote, the enemy being the one who is different.
Right.
So let's turn the page. Both and thinking. What this illustrates, of course, and what he's talking, what illustrates what we were just talking about. What this illustrates, of course, is a newly discovered capacity for what many religions have called non-dualistic thinking, or both and thinking. It is almost the benchmark of our growth into the second half of life. More calm and contemplative seeing does not appear suddenly, but grows almost unconsciously over many years of conflict, confusion, healing, broadening, loving, and forgiving reality. It emerges gradually as we learn to incorporate the negative, learn from what we used to exclude, or as Jesus puts it, forgive the enemies, or love the enemies, both within and without. And that's important to realize, you know, it's not just the enemy out there, the neighbor who doesn't do things the way we do, but it's also those disparate parts of ourselves. This is why he keeps coming back to how important shadow work is, right? Because our shadow side is a part of ourselves that needs to be acknowledged, owned, incorporated, And that is loving the enemy as well, because those are the parts of ourselves that we're hiding, the parts we don't want anybody to see. But to be able to bring those up into and recognize them as part of ourselves is part of the work that we're talking about. You no longer need to divide the field of every moment between up and down, totally right or totally wrong, with me, or against me. It just is. This calm allows you to confront what must be confronted with even greater clarity and incisiveness. This stance is not passivity at all. It is, in fact, the essential link between true contemplation and skillful action. The big difference is that your small and petty self is out of the way. And if God wants to use you, which God always does, God's chances are far better now. At this point, we can actually become part of the solution and not just a greater part of the problem. Because we're not bringing our ego in, our biases in, our attachments in to the relationship or the circumstance. We're able to really be present to what's going on, to see what's going on, and make our choices based on that reality, that shared reality that we have with everybody else. Dualistic thinking is the well-practiced pattern of knowing most things by comparison. That's really all our minds do, right? Compare and contrast. So dualistic thinking, typical egoic thinking, first half of life thinking is the well-practiced pattern of knowing most things by comparison. And for some reason, once you compare or label things, that is, judge them, you almost always conclude that one is good and the other is less good or even bad. Don't take my word for it. Just notice your own thoughts and reactions. You will see that you will move almost automatically into a pattern of up or down, in or out, for me or against me, right or wrong, black or white, gay or straight, good or bad. It is the basic reason why the stinking thinking of racism, sexism, classism, homophobia, religious imperialism, and prejudice of all kinds is so hard to overcome and has lasted so long, even among nice people. That's really an important paragraph, an important thing to consider. At the risk of being too cleverly alliterative, though it may help you remember, here is the normal sequencing of the dualistic mind. It compares, it competes, it conflicts, it conspires, it condemns, it cancels out any contrary evidence, and it then crucifies with impunity. You can call it the 7 C's of delusion and the source of most violence, which is invariably sacralized as good and necessary to make the world safe for democracy or to save souls for heaven. You see how that works? I mean, sometimes we look at the actions of religious people, even sanctioned by the church or done in the name of God, and we think, how in the world can someone do the things that they're doing that are so abusive and hateful and divisive in the name of Jesus or in the name of God? But this is how it works. You know, he's giving us that insight. To compare, compete, conflict, conspire, condemn, cancel, crucify, all of that can be sacralized. And we can see it as a virtue because we have become so identified, so attached to one type of thinking, one belief system that is right and everything else is wrong. And in order to save people from themselves, save people from their own ignorance, we have to hurt them. We have to beat them over the head until they recognize their evil ways. And now we're off to the races. Non-dualistic or contemplative thinking was put off or fully denied in the first half of life for the sake of quickly drawn ego boundaries and clear goals, which created a nice, clean, provisional personality. Dualistic thinking works only for a while to get us started. But if we're honest, it stops being helpful in most real-life situations. It's fine for teenagers to really think that there is some moral or supernatural superiority to their chosen baseball team, their army, their ethnic group, or even their religion. but one hopes they learn that such polarity thinking is recognized as just an agreed upon game by the second half of life. That's a great statement. When we talk about mental assent or an agreed upon game, I mean, when you think about it, it's, how is this little green piece of paper worth $100? I mean, why is it worth $100? Why will someone give it to somebody else and they'll give them $100 worth of merchandise or whatever they think it's worth? It's just an agreement that we have among each other that we're going to agree that this piece of paper has that value. Maybe we can, one day in the past, it was a clamshell that one cave dweller gave to another one, and they gave an animal skin in return. It's whatever we agree on, the value of saying, what is this cryptocurrency, or NSFs, non-fungible Ts, NFTs, right? I mean, it's just an agreement that we have that this actually means something or is worth something. And everything is like that when you think about it. All our belief systems, they're only as good as the agreement that we have between people. And something is worth more when more people agree that it's worth more. And for really no other reason than because more people agree. So if we're looking for real truth, we're going to have to look deeper than that. And so his idea here that, hopefully by the time that you get to a certain age, you recognize that it's just an agreed upon game when you get to the second half of life. And yet when you think about all the wars and all of the atrocities that are perpetrated among people, it has to do with this very aspect. That someone can look at another person and see them as less than human because they don't share the truth, quote unquote, whatever that truth happens to be. To finish that thought, your frame should grow larger as you move toward the big picture in which one God creates all and loves all, both Dodgers and Yankees, blacks and whites, Palestinians and Jews, Americans and Afghanis. Okay, we read through a lot of big paragraphs there. Any reactions, questions, anything you want to bring up at this point?
Well, that's the root of thinking of tribalism, because that's how it is. That's why people go to wars. And then also the example, Dodgers and Yankees. The Dodgers will pray, oh my gosh, God, please, we will win this game. The Yankees also pray, oh, we will win this game. You're praying to the same God. Somebody has to win. Somebody has to lose. Just that thinking, So, yeah.
And Abraham Lincoln said the same thing about the North and the South.
Oh.
They both read the same Bible.
Yeah.
They both pray to the same God, and yet it's quite clear that both prayers can't be answered fully because somebody has to win and somebody has to lose, in a conflict like that. So it's the same thing, both read the same Bible and pray to the same God. And yet, see, this is when we can grow out of that tribalistic attitude. And yet, where does it come from and why should it be so? Because it's necessary. If we didn't have minds that could catalog and quickly make distinctions, what is friend, what is foe, what is going to sustain us and what is going to kill us, we have to catalog those things for quick retrieval. If we had to stop and consider everything every time we're walking through the forest, we're not going to get very far. And so it's important for us to be able to have that catalog back there, those quick judgments that we can make out of shared knowledge. And our tribe has this way of doing it because this is what works in this environment. This is how we survive. And so we don't have to think about it. We just do it. We're taught it as children, and it's what allows us to grow up into actual adults. And so there's a biological reason why we live this way. But if we're going to become elders in the tribe, it's that we can now see beyond that and see, yes, this is a tool for survival, but our actual being and who we are as a people is built in something that transcends all of that. And in Aboriginal cultures, there is a reverence for the elder, and the elder still has say and has importance in the tribe because they bring that balance between first and second half of life. And they're the ones who can actually temper the impulses of the young braves, right? And the young people and their first half of life predilections. And so we don't have that balance anymore in our culture in the West because the elderly have been eliminated out of the picture. And so we're out of balance now. We're all first half of life, and the church has followed suit. The church has not had the balance. And so it's really up to us now to swim against the stream of our own culture to try to provide that balance for ourselves, and then hopefully at least be able to influence within our own sphere the mindset of our small communities, something like that. So both and thinking is going to extend to this realization that it's also a combination of first and second half of life. We never just fall down to one side completely, but we want to see the first half of life and process the first half of life and the necessity of living for performance and accomplishment as a survival, but to see that through the lens of the second half of life so that we're always balanced. And we're able to temper the impulses of the first half of life through the balance with the second. So again, it's not either or, not first half or second half. It's not that we pass through the second half and now we're fully pass through the first half and now we're fully second half. It's that we're going to be a combination of both. I don't know if you remember early on in the book, he said that the higher stages of growth always include the previous ones, whereas the previous ones can't include the higher ones. So as we grow, we become an inclusive of everything that we pass through, which is really where we want to get. That's also both and thinking, second half of life thinking, non-dualistic thinking. Any other thoughts? Continue on. Okay, so we've got one God who actually creates all, loves all, and actually loves both Dodgers and Yankees. All right. Now, the trouble is that a lot of people don't ever get to this place. They don't get there. We are often so attached to our frame, game, and raft that it becomes a substitute for objective truth because it's all we have. Inside such entrapment, most people do not see things as they are. Rather, they see things as they are. Kind of a cute sentence there, right? They don't see things as they are. They see things as they are. We've talked about that over and over in terms of the filter. That none of us see reality directly. We see it through the filter of our worldview, the filter of our belief system, the filter of the sum total of everything that we have given mental assent to, that we have agreed upon. That's what we end up seeing. And reality only survives through that filter. The idea of second half of life seeing is to remove the filter. Not to throw it away, but to be able to remove it and say, this is a tool that I need to be able to survive in my own culture, but I can take it off like a pair of glasses so that I can actually see reality as it is. And I can use both seeing as I need to. But that's a great sentence. They don't see things as they are. They see things as they are. In my experience, this is most of the world, unless people have done their inner work, at least some shadow work, and thereby entered into wisdom or non-dualistic thinking. Through centuries of meticulous and utterly honest self-observation, Buddhism has helped people see this in themselves probably better than most of the world religions. Jesus saw it, but we did not see him very well. And that's a very true statement. Buddhism is not really a religion so much as a practice. It's a way of life. It's a philosophy. It's a way of getting from here to there. And I think he's probably right. It's so clearly delineated almost obsessively so
Mhm.
in the way it's broken down, from the 3 core truths to the 4 noble truths to the 8-fold path. I mean, it's so meticulously laid out that you can see what's going on. Whereas Jesus, as the poet, he's making these intuitive leaps and using all these metaphors and analogies and never really spells the thing out step by step the way
Mhm.
Buddhism does. But it's really the same thing, And Jesus is an Eastern man, even though later on Rohr is going to call him a Western man, and I'll go toe to toe with him on that one. But at any rate, he's absolutely right. Jesus saw the world and saw the path much the same way, because what's Buddhism basically about in the short of it? It's getting rid of our attachments to impermanent things. That's what causes the dukkha, the suffering in life. So if we can get rid of those attachments, that's the same thing we're talking about here. If we can get rid of our identification with the things that the first half of life is obsessed over, which is all impermanent, all of that stuff is going to be taken from us at some point. Then we can move into a true second half of life perspective.
I was reacting to the shadow stuff. I watched a show on Netflix that's called Stutz. It's a documentary that Jonah Hill made of some of the stuff that he gained from his psychiatrist, and he wanted to share some of the tools that the psychiatrist offered him. So he made a documentary about the psychiatrist himself. And one of the things he said that resonates with this is the idea that without the shadow, there is no opportunity for growth at all. Like we need the shadow in order to become better people, essentially. And I don't remember exactly how he said that, but that I thought I was just really moved by his language of, and I think we talked about this in Owning Your Own Shadow as well. The idea here is that these are the parts of ourselves that we want to deny and get rid of.
Yeah.
But if that didn't exist, we wouldn't improve at all. It's like we need that shadow self to just become better people, or we have nothing to rub up against, essentially, and recognizing that they're all part of one package was kind of a cool way of saying that. And I think Richard Rohr would agree with that both and
Oh,
thinking.
absolutely. And isn't it fascinating, William and everybody? But that's exactly the way the ancient Hebrews looked at Satan, Hasatan, right?
Right.
Hasatan was the furtherance of God's will. He wasn't opposed to God's will. He was the one that, just in the same language that William used, he was like the shadow side of ourselves. He was what we have to rub up against. He was the one who was providing the alternative that allowed us to really exercise free will and to actually grow the challenges and trials that we need to grow. Think Job. And you see that what William just said incorporates the way the Jews understood Satan's role in this, not as a cosmic foil to God, but as God's employee, the furtherance of God's will, because that's what allows us to actually grow. We need that adversity, that challenge, that alternative of choices to be able to grow, the temptations or whatever you're going to call them.
Right.
But, that's great language there, because it just encapsulates the whole thing. So yeah, we absolutely need that. So we spend all our time suppressing the shadow side because it's not what the group is going to reward us for, right? And so we learn that in our families, first of all, and then in the larger society. Hey, man, you exhibit these traits and you're going to go to prison. You exhibit these traits and you're not going to get the lollipop. And so we suppress it all. But what we need, again, religio in the second half of life, is to bring that all back to bear, because it's a part of us and it's an essential part that needs to be played out, but played out constructively, right?
Right.
And that's where ritual comes in, because remember, as Robert Johnson said, the unconscious mind can't distinguish between a ritual and a real activity. as you're playing out the ritual, the unconscious mind sees it as the same thing. Just like the dreamer can't distinguish between the dreamscape and the real landscape. It looks the same. It's the same thing to the unconscious mind. So we can play out that shadow in our rituals and in our spiritual practices in a very constructive way that hurts nobody, but it still does the job of recognizing, bringing to light the shadow and working it out, working it through.
And the
What was
shadows,
that line, Dave? I'm sorry. The unconscious mind cannot distinguish between.
Ritual and actual real activity.
Okay.
So in the acting out of the ritual, the unconscious mind sees it in the same way as acting it out in real life. Kathy?
I'm worried that I'm getting confused with ego on some of this. So ego is
Okay.
not what we're referring to as shadow. I mean, I think we talked before about ego being necessary in the first half of life. You know, as a child, you're growing, and having the healthy ego is good. And then I guess we should learn how to suppress the ego as we get older and get into our second half and other things become important. So, but that's not what we're referring to on the shadow. It's not the same as the ego then.
No,
I think the ego comes with shadow.
So some of that is tied together, you think?
Yeah, but it's not exclusively shadow. So like our Enneagram type would be our ego, and our shadow would be like the passions and things like that.
Okay, I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
The sins are, yeah, the passions you're referring to. I know what you're talking about.
Mhm.
Okay. The deep-seated stuff.
Right.
Ego
well,
is a
the
component.
shadow is the part of our personality, of which our ego is part of our personality, right? But it's the part that we have learned that the group disapproves of. Because different cultures are going to have different shadows. What is shadow in our American culture is not necessarily going to be shadow in another culture. You know, some cultures you burp at the end of the meal, and that's a compliment to the chef, right? And so that's encouraged in that culture, but in our culture, of course, it's frowned upon. You know, that's kind of a very superficial example, but different cultures are going to have different ways of identifying what is shadow, what is verboten. And so we learn that, and then we suppress it in ourselves. So so yes, there is a distinction between ego and shadow, but they do also have overlap.
Okay.
Did that help or muddy the waters, Kat?
No, it helps. I
Okay.
see it's connected. I see it. But
Mhm.
yeah, thanks.
I want to go back and add something about the discussion about filter in our minds. And then, in the paragraph that says, most people do not see things as they are, rather than we see things as they are. I took this introduction to drawing class many, many years ago. I was like 19, 20. And it was the most wonderful art teacher, because he says, here's a boot. It's lace worn boot. He says, you do not draw a shoe. You draw what you see. And when we did that as a class, it was the most beautiful drawings. Because once you want to, and then I've seen other classmates when they say, oh, we're going to draw a shoe, there's erasings and so the ones who say, okay, draw what you see, it was freeing actually. You just draw.
Mhm.
And
That's
it's a
great
better
example.
product at the end.
That's why sometimes the class will have you draw something upside down, and you can't actually see what it is you're drawing, and so you automatically just see shapes, and you draw the shapes that you see.
Yeah,
And then you turn it right side up. Oh, it's a shoe. You know.
Yeah,
That's
there
how
you
it's
go.
drawing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's perfect, Ellen. That's removing the filter.
Yeah.
We're not
That
drawing
was
something that we've already categorized in our mind and
right.
judged in our mind to be a shoe. And so we have to conform to that anymore. Now we can just see what's there.
Right.
Perfect.
Yeah, that was a great lesson.
Yeah, it really is. You know, it's so much about identity and it's what we identify and attach to. I remember there was a guy here at the Effect who came, And I remember his first meeting, actually it was with me and Nina, the three of us sat down, and he leaned forward in the chair and stuck out his chin and he said, "I'm gay. What are you going to do about it?" Basically, you know. It was so hilarious because he'd been beaten up so bad by Christians, you know, about gayness. And so, you know, he said, "Nothing. If you want to be here, you're here." And he stayed with us for several years. When he finally moved back home, he was out here for the program. When he finally moved back home to Florida, we stayed in touch, and he said, you know, that he had found a gay church, and he was really excited about this gay church because, you know, kind of like William was saying, you know, even though he connected with us, you know, there weren't a lot of gay people, at least that were out anyways. And
Right.
so, you know, he was kind of still feeling like he was on his own, even though he was loved and accepted by all. And so he's really excited about that. I said, okay, well, let's see how that works, you know, and he could hear the hesitation in my voice, and he asked about it. And I said, here's the problem I have. If you have a church that is built around your identity in your sexuality or your sexual identity, then you already, you know, you're tearing at your core purpose, because the real purpose of religion is to lose your attachment to these identities that we glom onto in the first half of life. And it actually, he didn't last there very long. You know, there was a lot of cliques and infighting and all kind of crazy stuff going on in that church. And I can't say that it all relates to my core problem with it, but I think that remains. And any church that is so identified to anything like that, whether it's prosperity or whether it's politics or whatever it happens to be, you're kind of doomed before you start.
Right.
Because the whole part of religio, of religion, is supposed to be to pull everything back together again and find that deeper identity and connection. So let's see, where the heck are we now? Okay, back on page 148. Buddhism helped people see this in themselves probably better than most of the world religions. Jesus saw it, but we didn't see Jesus very well. In the first half of life, the negative, the mysterious, the scary, the problematic are always exported elsewhere. That's an interesting line. What do you think he means by negative, mysterious, scary, and problematic being exported elsewhere?
Well, it's a dualistic frame, right? If it doesn't fit, if it doesn't feel comfortable, if it doesn't supply us with the certainty we're seeking, then we just put it in some other category, essentially.
Is it like if it's a mysterious, then it's canceled? If it's, you know, if it's problematic, then you blame someone else. Is that what he means, like pushing it off to something else?
I think absolutely that's what he means. And we could probably put it all under the heading of scapegoating, right? I mean, that's what we're really doing, is we're going to create a boogeyman who is going to be the recipient for all of those things that we can't account for and can't deal with, or are part of our shadow side, and the messy, icky things that we don't want to deal with. And we're going to put them on the goat and then send the goat out the city gates, you know? And so I think that's what he's talking about in terms of exporting it elsewhere. We're going to project it onto some other person or some other group, some other nation, some other baseball team.
Right.
You know,
especially the ones we're attacking, right?
Exactly. That's it.
Yeah, but it's the spot it, you got it thing.
If you spot it, you got it.
Well, I think a lot of people in this group have heard it before. What irritates me about others is actually what I'm not happy about myself either. So yeah, you so-and-so kind of stuff. That's the part. And again, the judging and such and the condemnation and stuff, a lot of it has to do with the shame that I carry with myself. I have this standard, this imagination of what a good person is, and I'm not meeting that standard myself personally, and I'm projecting it upon others. So for myself, that was, I had a friend put out the hypothesis, and not just spot it, you got it, but everything that you conceive as being inadequate, you've done yourself. Everything. Like 416 things that I could say is less, it was a person that's inadequate or a bad person and stuff. You've done every single one of those things. And I got through about, I don't know, 15, 16, 18 of them before I gave up and just said, yeah, you're right.
Isn't that like what you said, William, once? There's some kind of a slogan that you say to yourself, that guy is being a jerk, just like me.
Just
And
like
you
me.
add just like me at the end of every sentence. That guy's being really rude, just like me. That guy's
like
being
me.
really,
So we
we
think
don't
about
like
it, you
that,
know,
Randy. That doesn't feel good though, but you're right about it.
but you think about what Randy's saying, the spot that you got it, really, we're talking about our shadow side, right?
Right.
It's the shadow attributes that we see, and we can see them in others because we are refusing to see them in ourselves. And so by projecting them outward, we can feel good about ourselves. And because it's out there someplace, and we can draw that hard and fast line. This is who I am, you know, and this is who they are. I'm right. I'm going to heaven. Everybody else, you know, not so much, which is what he says here in this next sentence, you know, doing so, doing what? Exporting, you know, the shadows, exporting these negative things that we don't understand, gives you a quick and firm ego structure that works for a while. But such splitting is not an objective statement of truth. It is just helpful for your private purposes. Eventually, this overcompensation in one direction must be resolved and balanced. The integration, or forgiveness of everything, as I like to call it, is the very name of growth, maturity, and holiness. In the second half of life, all that you avoided for the sake of a manufactured ego ideal starts coming back as a true friend and teacher. Doers become thinkers, feelers become doers, thinkers become feelers, extroverts become introverts. Well, I don't know about that one. You know. Visionaries become practical, and the practical ones long for vision. We all go toward the very places we avoided for the last 40 years, and our friends are amazed. Now we begin to understand why Jesus is always welcoming the outsider, the foreigner, the sinner, the wounded one. He was a second half of life man who had the unenviable task of trying to teach and be understood by a largely first half of life history, church, and culture. Yeah, great statement. But think about what he's saying here, and to bring the Enneagram back in as an analogy here, you know, thinkers are becoming feelers, and doers are becoming thinkers, and feelers and extroverts and all this. You know, I like to think of the Enneagram in the final analysis. We all want to come to the center of the wheel. We want to really balance all of those attributes. You know, we're going to have our go-to slice. That's going to be who we typically are and the way we're wired to be. But eventually we should be able to incorporate, or as he says, forgive everything, right? Incorporate all of those best traits and be able to bring them to bear when necessary in any given situation. That's what we're really after, is bringing all of that together, even though we still have, you know, a basic personality. William's always going to be a 9. That's just baked in.
I'm damn proud of it.
But he's going to be a healthy 9.
He's
And he'll be able to pull in other attributes as he needs, as more and more he incorporates all of this. So, yeah.
But also one of the things that I've been saying for quite some time about, like, especially being a 9, is that I recognize that sloth, laziness, you know, the tendency to avoid things like that will always, always, always be there. It's not something that I get rid of, essentially. It's something that, it's kind of like that shadow that I have to push up against. You know, and it's so, you know, I appreciate the compliment about being a healthy 9, but sometimes I don't see
But
it.
William, the compliment is really, I think if you are aware of that and you know yourself, you can not ignore it. At least you're aware of it. You can do something about it, or you can catch yourself when you're in it. That's the beauty of knowing your Enneagram number and just understanding yourself better too. So.
I'm just amazed at how often I give into it.
Well, but see, this is the thing of self-deprecating humor. kind of thing. You know, if somebody can laugh at themselves because, I don't know, I fart in church kind of thing. You know, I don't carry necessarily the same burden, the same shame. I don't necessarily think I am a burdened because of something, since you used the word sloth. Okay, so I'm slothful. Okay, and well, that's not the way you're supposed to be. Well, I am what I am. You know, some days I'm slothful, some days I'm not. Again, it's just not as a heavy millstone hanging around the neck. And that's my interpretation of healthy, is that I can navigate through life, warts and all, instead of never ever wanting to look at the wart.
Right. Yeah, but I mean, I'm still experiencing things like paying penalties on taxes because I just don't want to sit down and do the work.
That is a little different discussion.
That's some
William, you
deep
need to
shadow
get a
work,
little-
William.
Yes, there is consequences for me not taking out the trash.
Right.
And yes, our government will remind me there are consequences for not paying my taxes.
And please, everyone has to remember, right, when they say you learn about yourself, and if you're missing some kind of characteristic, you either contract it, you hire it, or you marry it, and that's what you do.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Pay someone who can.
But you know, truthfully, I am an introvert, and I will always be an introvert, and that's the way I'm wired. Did you all, if you were all on the morning mirth list, did you get the introvert piece I sent out this morning
Yes.
on the
I
introverts?
haven't read it yet, but
Okay.
got it.
Is anyone not on the morning mirth? Getting
I
the
think I
jokes?
dropped off of it somehow.
Did you drop off? I'll check and see, Kathy. If you're an introvert or you just want to understand introverts better, this was pretty cool. But at any rate, and it had jokes about introversion, but my larger point is I'm an introvert. I'll always be an introvert. I have learned to look like an extrovert when I need to be. In fact, often when I tell people I'm an introvert, you know, they're amazed because, well, I'm a pastor and a musician and I do all these things. It doesn't look, yeah, I can work a room. I can do all that kind of stuff, but it exhausts me and I'm going to pay for it later on. But the point is, when I can get to the point that being an introvert no longer limits me from any kind of relationship that I want to have and need to have in the fullness of my humanity, then it really doesn't matter that I'm an introvert anymore. And that's where we're getting. So when you're a 9 who is no longer limited by 9-ness, and you're able to pull where you need to be able to complete the picture in any given moment, then you've transcended that. And I think that's really where we're supposed to get. We're supposed to be a balance as much as possible. And the stone will never be smooth, and we'll always be working out that balance. But again, 51%, if we can just get there, more often than not, we can bring that balance into our decision making in any given moment, then we are relatable. You know, we are able to love the enemy when we need to, and we're not going to be part of the problem anymore. We'll actually be part of the solution. And that's second half of life as well. So that's where we're headed. Okay, we better call it a night for now. This was great. This is a great discussion tonight. Thanks, everybody. Let's see. Scotty, where the heck are you? There you are. Down at the bottom now. It's weird how people keep moving in the squares.
Well, as people log on and off, they change positions.
Yeah, it messes me up. Okay, go ahead, Scotty.
Lord, we pray for Dave's inability to handle these mess ups. Lord, we thank you for the sense of humor that you have, that you give to us to share with each other and encourage each other. The deep things that are left for us to figure out and be taught along life's journey. We're just grateful for your attention, your love, and your desire to have us as your kids, Lord. Thank you for your patience with us, your endurance with us, and your abundant love for us. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Everybody.
We'll see you Sunday on the stream and next Tuesday, and we'll start all over again. Thanks so much.
Thank
Good night,
you.
guys.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Dave,
Yeah,
I have a question for you.
I'm
So
sorry.
should I take, when Polly didn't believe that I was an introvert today, when I told her I was an introvert, and she said, oh, no way. So should I take that as a compliment? Because I've learned,
Absolutely. That
I
means
don't
that you-
believe that.
Yeah, people don't believe me. I am an introvert.
See,
But
that
like
means
you
you've
said-
transcended your introvertedness in
I
their
have
eyes. That's
transcended,
beautiful.
exactly.
Yes, take that as a compliment.
Take it as a
Absolutely.
compliment. Okay. Thanks,
Absolutely.
everybody.
Thanks,
All right.
Sharon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night, guys.
Bye,
Good night,
Kathy.
everyone. Bye,
Bye,
John.
Sharon.
John, quit dominating the conversation, would you, in the future? All right.
My best.
All right. See you
God
guys
bless.
in a
Good
few
night.
days. Good night.
Bye. See you guys on Sunday.
All right. Bye, Linda.
Thank you.